It's 2014 and Marvel just asked a game studio to handle one of the biggest IPs in the world, Spider-Man. But this studio's last game only made a couple $100 with development in the millions. They were on a string of failures with their incredible legacy on the line. If they took this deal, they'd have one shot to beat the terrifying shadow of the Arkham games, erase the years of damage from terrible Spidey releases, and take down a literal god. But this is how their greatest failure turned into their greatest weapon, how the stars aligned for this deal to happen, and how a group of friends cemented their legacy in video game history. This is the miraculous story of Insomniac Games.
We really care about storytelling.
Hello, New York!
This is great.
We were either going to succeed or fail grandly.
We've got to play this just right.
This was made 5 fans for fans.
And we're going to do whatever it takes to give people the game that they've been waiting for.
To understand the pressure Insomniac was facing, we have to go back a couple decades. It's 1991 and 26-year-old Ted Price is working at his uncle's medical company in San Diego. But as the years go by, Ted realizes he doesn't care about medicine. Ever since he was 10, he always had the dream of making video games. So a couple years later in 94, Ted risks his savings and stable job to chase a childhood dream of making video games with no experience in the game industry and no programming skills whatsoever. He rents a small office and buys a dev kit for the new 3DO console that was marketed as the future of gaming, and then names his company Extreme Software. But you see, Ted doesn't actually know how to program games, and this is where fate makes its first move. Ted's mom's friend's son's roommate just graduated from Princeton with a degree in computer science and was looking for work. His name, Alex Hastings. Al agrees to move across the country to San Diego and join Extreme Software with Ted, and this two-man crew gets to work on their first Hail Mary, Disruptor, a first-person shooter inspired by Doom. They built a prototype for the 3DO console in just 30 days and went to every publisher they could think of to get funding. Everyone said no because who was going to bet on two guys with no experience in what looked like another Doom clone? Well, Mark Cerny at Universal Interactive Studios saw something others missed. This two-man team built a 3D prototype in record time knowing nothing about the game industry. Mark saw potential and he didn't bet on the game, he bet on the team. Universal signed Extreme Software to a 3-game deal. And with this extra funding, Al's older brother Brian joined the team for more programming firepower. The three of them started putting in hundreds of hours into the game to the point where they were all insomniacs getting no sleep at all. But just as things were looking good, they get hit with a copyright lawsuit for their company name and were forced to change it. And just like that, fate played its hand once again. Extreme Software officially becomes Insomniac Games. After 2 years of development on Disruptor, the game releases in December of 1996. It sells around 200,000 copies. But before Insomniac started on their second game for Universal, Mark Cerny had sensed a shift in the gaming world, with PlayStation's projected audience shifting younger. At this point, the Insomniac team had now grown to around 10 people, and a new artist, Craig Stitt, pitches a dragon, and the idea clicks immediately. Spyro the Dragon releases September of 1998, and in a couple months the game sells nearly 2 million copies in the US alone. The Spyro trilogy eventually moves over 11 million copies and becomes Insomniac's first successful franchise. But here's the thing, they don't own the Spyro IP, Universal does. And Insomniac wanted to build something new, but if they stayed with Universal, they'd just be making Spyro 4, 5, 6, and so on. So Insomniac left Universal and would pitch directly to Sony instead. So Brian Hastings attempts to wow Sony by pitching a space adventure with gadgets. Rachet and Clank was born. It launched in 2002 and it becomes a PlayStation icon. Insomniac had just created back-to-back franchise successes, but something gut-wrenching happens during Christmas of 2002. See, Sony owns the Rachet IP just like Universal owned Spyro, and during the holiday season, a new Spyro game releases, developed by a different studio that Universal handed the IP to. Fans and critics tear it apart, and it was poorly received across the board. Insomniac had to sit there and watch their first real success get ruined by another studio. In 2006, the PS3 launches and Sony needs a killer launch title to compete with Xbox, and Insomniac steps up to the plate to deliver Resistance Fall of Man. They pumped out a sequel, and while the third game in the franchise received mixed reviews, the Resistance trilogy would move over 8 million copies. 3 separate franchises, 3 massive successes, and Insomniac owns none of them. See, here's why IP ownership was so important to Ted Price. When you own the IP of a character, you control the creative direction. Nobody can force you to make sequels, and nobody can hand your creation to another studio that ruins it. You also get the financial upside and security. Future merch sales, movie deals, game royalties, that all goes to the IP owner. And right now, Insomniac Games was basically an extremely talented freelancer. But after Spyro, Ratchet, and Resistance, they had a stellar record with over 40 million copies sold. On May 25th, 2010, Insomniac shocks the industry. They're leaving PlayStation exclusivity and going multi-platform to reach more people with their future games, and only partnering with publishers that would give them the all-powerful IP rights. What could possibly go wrong?
We're excited to expand to the Xbox audience.
Generic, forgettable. Don't waste your time.
You're never going to make everybody happy.
No one needs a hero right now.
I don't know if we're going to get this out on time.
Insomniac Games is finally free, and with their track record and size, they're going to chase 2 projects at the same time. First, EA agrees to publish a new game and let Insomniac keep the rights through their new partner program. It's everything Ted has wanted for 16 years. They immediately jump in and get started on their new game, Overstrike. It was Rachet and Clank fused with a spy thriller. The trailer drops at E3 2011 and people are excited. But while Overstrike is in development, something else is in motion. Insomniac needs to find a publisher for their second project. EA says no, Sony says no, publisher after publisher walks away the moment Insomniac demands IP ownership. Until they asked Microsoft, who was in an interesting situation. See, the Xbox One is about to launch in a couple years and they're desperate for exclusives. So they agree to fund everything and let Insomniac keep the IP, but it has to be an Xbox exclusive. Their second game, Sunset Overdrive, is officially in development. Insomniac is now building 2 massive games at once, but as Sunset ramps up, something goes wrong with Overstrike. Focus groups start testing the game, and the intended audience says it's too cartoony, too light. It feels like a kid's game. With games like Call of Duty, Battlefield, and Gears of War dominating the market, Overstrike felt wrong for 2012. A lot of members wanted to keep the fun, humorous vibe, but ultimately, Ted made the call according to the data, and Overstrike pivoted into a more dark and gritty game. The humor got stripped out, the Ratchet DNA gets removed, and Overstrike is renamed to Fuse. It's now May 2013, and Fuse is launched to the world. And then came the reviews. Inexplicably bland. It's hard to believe Insomniac actually made this. It only sold around 300,000 copies globally and becomes one of the lowest rated games in Insomniac's history. Insomniac has to watch Fuse fail, knowing their entire future now rides on a single game that's still a year and a half from release. Development is massive. They built an entire open world city with a traversal system they've never attempted before. Wall running, grinding, bouncing, the city becomes a playground with the main protagonist voiced by the popular Yuri Lowenthal. On October 28, 2014, Sunset Overdrive launches. Insomniac holds their breath as the reviews come in. Eye-popping visuals, exhilarating traversal mechanics. It's nominated for Best Xbox Game at the Game Awards. People love it, critics love it. Insomniac did it, or did they? The game sold nearly 2 million copies across Xbox One and PC, generating around $50 million. But after Microsoft recoups over $40 million in development costs, marketing expenses, distribution fees, and publishing costs, Insomniac's profit was $567. They made a great game and owned the rights to Overdrive, but what's the point of owning IP that can't even fund your next game? Insomniac then tried to create mobile games. They tried making VR titles for Oculus, AR experiments for devices almost nobody owns. The team is trying everything and nothing sticks. Every title that drops is a hit on their legacy. It's been 4 years since leaving Sony and not a single win on the board. Ted said it was the most stressed he's ever been, and he was wondering what was next for Insomniac. But fate plays its hand once again. The phone rings. It's Connie Booth. She's been Sony's executive producer on their games since Spyro. She's worked alongside Insomniac for over 20 years, and she has a question. Connie asked Ted if he's interested in working with Sony and Marvel, but Ted has never worked on someone else's IP before because he didn't like the constant oversight and micromanaging. And would going back to work with Sony mean they failed as independent developers? And what would the optics of this look like to the press? But for the first time, Ted realizes he isn't alone anymore. It's not just him, Al, and Brian working on a shooter. Insomniac is not a single person. It's a collective of some of the most brilliant minds in the gaming industry. Connie sweetens the deal and tells Ted that they can choose any hero to make a game on if they came on board. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so Ted cautiously takes this offer back to his team for a vote, without fully realizing just how miraculous this opportunity was. See, Marvel had just restructured their vision for their characters by moving away from rushed movie tie-in games, in an attempt to create deeper games to rival the Arkham trilogy. And now they just needed to find the people who would build their Batman killer. Xbox initially declined Marvel's pitch because they wanted to own the IP, but Sony agrees to move forward. Now Sucker Punch Productions, one of PlayStation's first-party studios, would be the clear choice since they have experience with heroes, but they were working on Ghost of Tsushima. Naughty Dog, they were cooking up Last of Us 2. Santa Monica, they were rebooting God of War. See, not only did Marvel just happen to be pivoting with their vision, but Sony had to also agree. Every other studio needed to be busy, Insomniac needed to have a clear schedule, and to make this even crazier, Insomniac's recent game oddly resembled the movement a particular hero might have. Ted takes his offer to his team, and he expected pushback and outrage, but to his surprise, it was an overwhelming yes to work with one of the greatest names in entertainment. We don't know what was going through Ted's mind that day. Was his fixation on owning IP holding him back? Was the recent fumble bringing his ability into question? Or was all this just in his head? But Ted puts the team first and makes the ambitious decision to work with Sony and Marvel on a game that could rival Arkham. Insomniac had dozens of heroes to choose from, but they landed on Spider-Man. And Ted later said Spidey has an underdog story quite like Insomniac, so was a perfect fit. But as Insomniac was getting ready to embark on this journey, they would soon realize the 5 daunting threats they'd run into. First, it was the IP pressure. Spider-Man is Marvel's most valuable character, and with his gaming reputation destroyed, it was up to Insomniac to make people believe Spider-Man games can be good again. The next one was the Arkham Shadow. Rocksteady Studios had taken a cursed IP and created the definitive superhero gaming experience which Insomniac would have to match. The third was some internal competition. Sony's flagship developer, Santa Monica Studios, was rebooting the God of War franchise, and both games would coincidentally launch in 2018. The fourth, financial pressure. While their financials weren't public, Fuse, Overdrive, and the string of failed projects wasn't helping their bottom line, so they needed a win on the board. And the final threat would be the enormous technical challenge. An open world city 6 times the size of Overdrive, seamless web swinging, and the task of learning the PS4's new hardware. Insomniac Games was about to start the hardest, most stressful project of their lives, and they now have 4 years and 1 shot at glory.
What is our responsibility?
To make the best Spider-Man game ever.
We understand how important this character is to a lot of people.
We only have 1 shot.
At least want to do it justice.
Marvel's most valuable IP is now in the hands of Insomniac, but who would lead the vision? See, just like Peter had to take a leap of faith and accept the responsibility of being Spider-Man, Brian Intihar would do the same. A journalist turned community manager since 2006, walked into Ted Price's office and demanded the creative director position with no directing experience. And Ted had a choice to make. The stakes couldn't be higher. This was their shot at erasing years of failure, their chance to beat Arkham, and their 1 shot to restore Spider-Man's name. And that's exactly why he gives Brian the job. A testament to the culture of rewarding passion at Insomniac. Brian got the role, but he just realized what he actually agreed to. The first disaster hit in the combat room, and when Brian saw the first combat demos, it looked exactly like an Arkham clone. They eventually realized Spider-Man needed verticality. He needed to be acrobatic and playful, but how do you translate that into game systems? The traversal room wasn't any better. See, Spider-Man 2 on the PS2 was legendary because the swinging was physics-based, but when playtesters tried Insomniac's physics-based prototype, they kept slamming into buildings and losing momentum. So Brian asked the traversal team to abandon physics entirely and try something else. The next stop at city development was also discouraging. Manhattan needed over 500 roads, 1,200 alleys, and 8,000 unique buildings. If they built it manually, they'd miss the deadline by years. The suit creation was no better. They sculpted Spider-Man as a skinny teenager first, but it looked awkward in motion. They tried a linebacker build next, but it was too bulky. Nothing was working. Brian was drowning and he was micromanaging every department. The team started losing confidence in the game, themselves and him. But Brian was running out of time and this was starting to feel like another fuse. And then, his team did something unexpected. They confronted him with honesty, not anger. They told Brian to stop trying to control everything and to trust them. But Brian had a good reason for all this. He felt like he had to know everything to prove that a journalist belonged in this leadership role of such an important game. But his team reassured him, and then he let go and learned to trust his peers. Then everything changed. The combat team finally cracked the code. They added gadgets like Rachet and Clank paired with aerial combat for creative free-flow action. The traversal team ditched physics completely and built a system around momentum transitions, inspired by their last game, Sunset Overdrive. If you hit a building, you'd automatically wall run. They added web zips, quick turns, and point launches. The city team also found their secret weapon with the program called Houdini. They've been experimenting with it since Sunset Overdrive, but now they'd mastered it. Artists would set design rules for different sections of Manhattan, like building heights, architectural styles, and density. Then Houdini would procedurally generate the areas in a fraction of the time it would take to do manually. And the suit finally came together, with art director Jacinda Chu having a breakthrough. She'd think like a 23-year-old Parker. He wouldn't wear red boots, he'd wear athletic trainers. After 8 years of Spider-Man, he'd figure out where he needed upgrades, like having the blue areas be more flexible, the red providing armor, the white panels were carbon fiber for blocking. They also settled on a fighter's build paired with the suit for a modern yet classic look. But while Brian and the crew were building Spider-Man, Ted Price was fighting a different battle. He was learning to stay out of the way. As Insomniac grew, Ted naturally separated from the day-to-day and focused on the culture of Insomniac. He would later say while it was hard to be away from creative decisions, it was necessary. He protected the culture, managed the business, and cleared the path so people like Brian could flex their creativity. A year later in 2017, Insomniac would showcase real gameplay, combat, swinging, and even stealth. And then God of War released in April 2018 with 3.1 million copies sold in just 3 days. Fast forward to summer 2018 and Spider-Man's combat was refined. Swinging was locked down, the city was immaculate, the suit was iconic, the story was set in stone, and Yuri Lowenthal, who voiced Sunset Overdrive, would make a return as Peter. The launch date of September 7th, 2018 was quickly approaching. Ted, Al, and Brian had trusted Intihar and the entire Insomniac crew to deliver a Batman killer, an unforgettable experience, and a game that could course-correct Insomniac's legacy. Everything they'd built over 24 years came down to this, and Insomniac's future would be decided in just a few days.
This feels like a game made by Insomniac. There's this push to get it right.
We are underdogs. How can we be better?
The time has come.
The ultimate Spider-Man experience.
That's what we have to swing for.
It's the night before launch. Brian Intihar is pacing, Ted Price watching, and somewhere in Burbank, 200 people who poured everything into this game are holding their breath. September 7th, 2018. Spider-Man launches and the reviews start flooding in. Critics call the web swinging exhilarating with the best traversal in any open world game. The combat gets praised for its creativity with gadgets and aerial moves. The city feels alive with 8,000 buildings. The suit is iconic and the story brilliant. And then the numbers hit. 3.3 million copies sold in just 3 days, which broke God of War's record by 200,000 copies. While Spider-Man had erased a decade of IP damage, matched Arkham's legacy, and became a massive success for Insomniac, the biggest win was the shift that happened inside Ted Price's mind. For 24 years, he'd been chasing one thing: owning what you create. But standing there, watching Intihar celebrate with the team, watching artists, designers, and programmers believe in something bigger than themselves, Ted realized what he'd actually been building all along. Al Hastings, who took a chance on a stranger 24 years ago and never left. Brian Hastings, who quit a stable job because his brother believed in something crazy. And now a new generation was already leading, not driven by ownership or corporate strategy, but driven by passion. Ted understood what he had to do. A year later, in August of 2019, Insomniac Games is acquired by Sony for $229 million. He traded his dream of owning IP for something he wanted more, making sure this team would never have to worry about the lights going out so they could focus on making great games. Ted realized Insomniac started as a place to build games, but slowly became a place that built dreamers brave enough to act on those dreams. Brave enough for Intihar to ask for a job he'd never done before. Brave enough for artists to pour their lives into details players might never notice. Brave enough for every person who joined Insomniac and thought, maybe my dream isn't so crazy after all, and maybe your dream isn't either.
You do not get in my way, you cannot drive in my lane. Tires is burning the paint, you don't have nothing to say. This is how legends are made, I know I got what it takes. And I'm not popping the brakes, I just been bringing the fire.
He's a criminal, that's who he is. A vigilante, a public menace. What's he doing on my front page?